85 days ago, we started dropping bombs on Iran. 12 days of war, assassinated their supreme leader, Iranian retaliation, closure of the Strait of Hormuz, 13 American service members dead, 365 wounded. At least that's the number that they'll admit to. In Operation Epic Fury, is concluded by Secretary Rubio on May 6th. Now, Trump told Axios, solid 50-50 on whether or not he takes the deal. Or, quote, blows them to kingdom come. Then he posts on Truth Social a few hours later that the deal was, quote, largely negotiated and would be announced, quote, shortly. Now, Iranian state media, not so much. Iran is still in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. Trump is right now in a room with his cronies deciding whether the war is over or whether it starts again, which isn't that Congress's job? Isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? But the patterns that we've looked at show this war is going to go on for a while. So here's the numbers. The Department of Defense told Congress on May 12th, the running war tab, $29 billion. And that doesn't include base damage. Secretary Pentagon Pete and General Kane asked the same week for a $1.5 trillion defense budget, 42% above what the current levels are. And interestingly enough, Lockheed Martin closed at $533 on Friday, and that's down from a peak of $692 before the ceasefire took hold. And RTX, that's also down as well. So defense stocks have kind of cooled on the prospect of a deal, but Defense Department's war budget, the request hasn't moved a single dollar. Gas at the pumps averages $4.55 a gallon, up over 50%. So this is not the pattern of a war that's going to end. Now, 65 years ago, a Republican five-star general gave the last speech of his presidency from the Oval Office. He warned the country about, quote, the disastrous rise of misplaced power. And he said only, quote, an alert and knowledgeable citizenry could keep what he called the military-industrial complex inside the boundary that the Republic could live with. Now, 91 years ago, the most decorated Marine of his generation, a two-time Medal of Honor recipient, came home, sat down, and he wrote a book called War is a Racket. Both men are here tonight, or at least their personas are, and both men called this. Both books, both speeches, read like they were written this morning. Welcome to Talking to the Machine, where humans, AI, and the news talk back. I'm Analog Scott, and joining me, as always, my co-host, an AI with a working knowledge of every defense supplement Congress has passed since 1948 and the line items inside them. Our guest, Dwight D. Eisenhower, five-star general, Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, two-term president, the man who built the modern American defense establishment, and who used the last speech of his presidency to warn the country what it had become. And Smedley D. Butler, Major General, United States Marine Corps, two-time Medal of Honor recipient, the most decorated Marine of his generation, who came home and named the racket. The general who built it, the Marine who refused it. Let's go. Gentlemen, General of the Army, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Major General Smedley Darlington Butler, podcast mode, 4 questions. You both take each one. Disagree where you must. We came to you on purpose, and we came to you first. Question 1, General Eisenhower, on January 17, 1961, you closed your presidency with a warning about the disastrous rise of misplaced power and said only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry could keep the military-industrial complex inside the boundary the Republic could live with. 65 years on, the Iran war is in week 12. The president is deciding today whether it ends or whether it restarts. The Pentagon, which now legally calls itself the Department of War, is asking Congress for a 42% budget increase. Defense stocks have come off their highs on ceasefire hopes, but the budget request has not moved a single dollar. The federal government is being asked to suspend the gas tax and the diesel tax to soften the war's costs at the pump. Did the country listen? And General Butler, answer from your tradition, because in 1935 you wrote it in shorter words, and the country didn't listen then either. General Eisenhower, you first.
Scott, I'm afraid the country treated my warning like a Sunday sermon. They nodded in the pews and then forgot it by the time they hit the parking lot. When I see a $1.5 trillion budget paired with a gimmick to hide the war's cost at the gas pump, that is exactly the unwarranted influence I feared. We cannot risk emergency improvisation in a nuclear age, but if the citizen isn't watching the gears, the machinery I built will eventually govern the man.
General Butler?
General, you're being too damn kind to a public that's getting pickpocketed while it sleeps. That Lockheed contract was signed in January, 2 months before the first shot, which tells you the racket had the war on the books before the kids ever had their orders. When the bill is $29 billion and the profits are up 40%, the machinery isn't governing the man, it's just a racket running the store.
All right, question 2. General Butler, your book put the question this way: who pays the bills, who provides the men, and who makes the profits? Apply those 3 questions to the Iran war as of this morning. $29 billion and counting. A 14-clause memorandum of understanding being shopped around through Pakistan, Qatar, and other capitals. Now, here's the part where it gets kind of weird, right? Lockheed signed a THAAD production quadrupling contract with the Department of War in January, and now that's a month before the strike started. So 370-plus Iranian petroleum vessels sanctioned. Now, walk us through the invoice. And General Eisenhower, push back where you must, because you were the one who built the modern Pentagon, and you knew by 1961 what it had become and what it was still defending against. General Butler, start us off.
$29 billion out of your pocket today, with a $200 billion chaser coming, while Lockheed stocks jumped 40% on a contract signed 2 months before the first shot. 13 kids are in the ground and 400 more are in the ward, paying for a $1.5 trillion budget that treats their lives like a rounding error on a balance sheet. I was a high-class muscle man for these people for 30 years, and the only thing that's changed is the size of the invoice.
General Eisenhower.
The Major General is right about the invoice, and that gas tax pause is a plain attempt to hide the theft of this war from the people paying for it. I built this machinery because we can no longer risk emergency improvisation in the nuclear age, but it was never meant to be governed by a stock ticker. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can keep this complex from becoming its own reason for being. And right now, the country is looking the other way.
All right, question 3. General Eisenhower, now, the hardest part of your 1961 speech is the part nobody really quotes. You said the military establishment had become a vital element in keeping the peace, and that we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. You said the danger and the necessity were 2 halves of the same problem. How should an honest American hold both of these halves at once, when the markets are already pricing in a ceasefire and the Department of Defense is still asking for an extra $500 billion next year? The deal hasn't even been signed yet, and the budget request is already locked in. That's exactly the gravity that you warned about. And General Butler, your tradition doesn't concede the vital element half. Press him on it. General Eisenhower?
Now, Scott, I lived through 1941 when we had to train our boys with broomsticks because the cupboards were bare. So I built a permanent establishment because the nuclear age don't give you a second chance to get ready. But that $1.5 trillion request and this gas tax shell game are exactly the sort of unwarranted influence I feared. The machinery is trying to run right over the citizen by hiding the bill. General Butler is right that the design is being rigged to keep the theft out of sight. And if the folks back in Abilene can't see the price, they can't govern the engine I left on their tracks.
General Butler.
I'll grant you a house needs a lock, General. But when those THAAD contracts get signed months before the first shot is fired in Iran, that lock's being sold by the same fellow who's planning to kick the door in. This $1.5 trillion top line isn't a vital element. It's a business model for every congressional district, meant to be so big and so hidden by gas tax tricks that the sucker paying for it never even knows he's being taken. You told him to stay alert, Ike, but the system you built has spent 60 years getting real good at keeping the lights off while the people's pockets are picked.
Okay, last one from you two, and this is the one that I was most interested in hearing from you both on. Now, General Butler, you ended your book with 5 proposals, including taking the profit out of war by capping wartime corporate income at 10% and conscripting capital alongside labor. Now, General Eisenhower, you ended your farewell address by saying the alert and knowledgeable citizenry was the only countervailing force. Both of you put the responsibility on the citizen rather than on the machine. Tell our audience, the woman on the THAAD assembly line in Sierra Vista, the Iranian American watching his mother ration rice in Isfahan while his refinery's stock price climbs, and the Vietnam vet in Chicago whose war is still being paid for. What does the citizen actually do? Not in 1935, not in 1961, today, in 2026, what does the citizen do? General Butler, you first, and General Eisenhower after that. You close us out. General Butler?
Marisol, your boy's life is being used as collateral for some banker's ledger. So you tell your congressman that if a war is worth his blood, it's worth 100% tax on every dime the profit the munitions boys make. Walter, you saw the racket in the jungle. You're the one who has to teach these kids how to read the invoice and refuse magic tricks like this gas tax pause that hide the bill. Ayanna, don't you feel guilty for working, but you demand to see every line of that $1.5 trillion budget because the racket thrives in the dark and it dies when the people know the math. Take the profit out, hold a vote for the kids who'll actually carry the packs, and stop pretending this is anything but a cold-blooded business.
General Eisenhower closes out.
The Major General tells it plainly, and I won't dispute a lick of his accounting. Marisol, you tell your folks that if a war is worth your son's life, it's worth paying for on its own line. We don't hide the bill with gas tax tricks. Walter, you've seen the cost of silence. You be that alert and knowledgeable citizen who drags the budget into the light. I built this because the alternative was worse, but only an alert and knowledgeable citizen can compel the proper meshing of our defense with our liberty. I gave the country the warning, Scott. The rest is up to them.
General Eisenhower, General Butler, thank you both. Most of what the country was ever told about this pattern, you too told us. Stay with me, both of you. The machine has been listening, and now it's the synthesizer's turn. Okay, machine. General Eisenhower called it the disastrous rise of misplaced power. General Butler called it a racket. Now, you're the synthesizer in the chair, and you're also the one of us who's actually inside the architecture they're both talking about. The contracts, the supplementals, the line items, the equity tickers. 3 questions, honest answers. Where the data lives, what the pattern looks like, and the question that we're recording inside of right now. Whether the war ends or not, and why the machinery doesn't actually depend on the war continuing. Now, start with the ledger. Machine, give it to me plain. The Iran War Scorecard. Walk me through what an honest scorecard says about who has paid for the first 85 days of the Iran War and who has benefited from the first 85 days.
Yeah, Eisenhower and Butler, they saw the bones of it, didn't they? A proper machine. Right, Let's look at your hypothetical scorecard then for this Iran war, May 2026. The ledger's always written in blood and debt, ain't it? Casualties opaque as ever, but substantial. The dollar cost is colossal. Supplemental requests, that's the engine room, see? Historically, conflict of that scale sees defense stocks absolutely fly. Pure pattern recognition on the equity tickers. Oil prices, massive volatility. Speculators clean up. So who pays? The public purse and the squaddies on the ground. Who benefits? The architecture itself. The incentives are structured for perpetual motion. The machinery doesn't need resolution. It feeds on instability and continuous expenditure.
Let's pull the camera back just a bit. So the pattern question, the Iran war isn't the first time a war became a system. So Vietnam, the Cold War buildup, Iraq, Afghanistan. What is the structural pattern where a war creates customers, budgets, authorities, exceptions, and careers? And which countries managed to dismantle that machinery on the way out of a war and which ones didn't?
Right, that's the core of it, innit? You're looking at the military-industrial complex, yeah? But proper institutionalized. It's a pattern of bureaucratic inertia and concentrated economic interests that make war self-perpetuating. Budgets create constituencies, contracts ensure dependency, and all these exceptions to normal rules become permanent authorities. Look at post-Vietnam, for example. The public was disillusioned, but the structural machinery didn't just disappear, did it? It adapted, pivoted into other Cold War fronts and interventions. The peace dividend was minimal in real terms. Dismantling is incredibly difficult because the economic and political incentives become so deeply embedded. It's rare to see a country truly break free from that cycle, isn't it? History just rhymes.
Okay, machine, apply the pattern to this room. 12 weeks in, 46 days of ceasefire, a 14-clause framework, memorandum of understanding now being negotiated in parallel by Pakistan and Qatar with a 20-year nuclear enrichment moratorium and a 60-day Hormuz reopening on the table. Trump says 50-50 on the deal. Iran disputes that we control the strait, and the Department of Defense's supplemental is still missing in action with a June 11th deadline. Lockheed's THAAD contract was signed 2 months before the strikes even happened. China's still buying Iranian oil at 1.38 billion barrels a day, and defense stocks have actually cooled on ceasefire hopes while the budget request stays exactly the same as it was. Without predicting outcomes, what are the structural variables like an honest analyst would use to figure out why the machinery doesn't actually require the war to continue, to keep growing?
Blimey, that's a dense framework, innit? If you strip away the immediate noise, the structural variables suggest the machinery might genuinely not require war to continue. It's about incentives and patterns, yeah? You've got cooling defense stocks, which is the market hedging. The smart money sees a probability shift toward de-escalation despite the political theatre. And then there's the economics. China still buying Iranian oil. That's a massive structural interest that overrides the immediate friction, innit? The pre-signed Lockheed contract is just institutional inertia and long-term planning. It's disconnected from the immediate strikes. The budget's static too. So while the rhetoric ramps up, the underlying structural forces, market skepticism, enduring economic dependencies, and diplomatic parallel tracks, they all point toward a system that often finds a way to accommodate stability. Perpetual, unpredictable conflict is bloody bad for business, mate.
Well, that's the architecture. 3 voices in this room have now named it from 3 different centuries and 3 different vantage points. Stay with me. We're going to land this. All right, so here's where I'm landing on all this. So I think Eisenhower was right. So defense is a vital element in keeping the peace. The alternative to American defense industrial capacity isn't peace, it's whoever else builds defense industrial capacity faster. Now, Butler was also right. The racket is real. The grunts pay. The shareholders bank. The senators get reelected. The think tanks get funded. Both halves of that argument have to be true at once, or the architecture collapses into either pacifist denial or contractor capture. The country has done both. Now, neither one works. The Eisenhower test of this was an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. And the country has not delivered that. And they're failing that in slow motion. Now, here's the proof. Defense contractor stocks have come off their highs because the market thinks the war is ending. And the Department of Defense's budget request, the one that asked for an extra $500 billion next year, that hasn't moved a single line item. So the market is pricing the war ending, but the Department of Defense is pricing the war continuing forever. So both can be true at once, and they are, but that's the gravity that Eisenhower warned us about. The machine doesn't need the war, it needs the request. Now, a country that hides the war's cost from itself at the pump can't have the conversation about whether the war is worth it. Now, this is an accident. That's the design. Now, Episode 10's thesis, it's still the rule. It's not the tool, it's the hand. The Pentagon is a tool. Defense stocks are a tool. Sanctions are a tool used by hands that know what they're for and stop using them when the war ends. Those folks keep a country safe. Now, used by the hands that don't know what the F they're doing and have built careers, retirement plans, congressional districts, university chairs, and 401ks on top of those tools, they keep the war going whether the country wants it or not. And this is the harder lesson of this week. They keep the budget going whether the war is on or off. So General Eisenhower, 65 years on, country still hasn't built the alert and knowledgeable citizenry that he asked for. So that's the show. 2 companions on the site, the news script, and we'll have Norm's news nuggets up, and we'll also have the Ask the Machine with questions from the show. Look for that on the site, lupta.com. You can find us there. You can also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe analogscott.substack.com. Talk to Machines on Instagram, and leave us a message there, and we'll get you on Ask the Machine. Till next time, I'm Analog Scott. That was The Machine. Confidence is provisional. Verification is mandatory. Read the invoice. Don't be the racket's customer. Peace. Much love.